First Part 1. A Random Act of Generosity. The city buzzed with energy as raindrops splattered against the windows of an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago. Inside, a man sat alone at a corner table, his expensive suit crisp and his posture rigid. This was Jonathan Reed, a name that echoed through boardrooms and headlines alike. Known for building a real estate empire from scratch, he had everything money could buy, except peace of mind. Tonight, however, wasn't about business deals or skyscrapers. It was about escaping the ghosts of his past. Jonathan's thoughts drifted back to memories he tried so hard to bury, the sound of laughter echoing through their old family home, the smell of pancakes on lazy Sunday mornings, and the face of his daughter, Emily. She had disappeared years ago under circumstances no one fully understood. The pain of losing her still lingered like an open wound, refusing to heal. He sighed deeply, signaling the waiter for the check. Once settled, he grabbed his umbrella and stepped out into the drizzle, deciding to take a walk instead of heading straight home. As fate would have it, his feet led him to a small diner tucked away on a side street. It wasn't fancy, just a cozy little place with neon signs flickering outside and the faint aroma of coffee wafting through the air. Something about its simplicity drew him in. The warmth inside felt comforting compared to the cold streets. He slid into a booth near the window, ordering a cup of black coffee. Moments later, a young woman approached his table. She couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a uniform that had seen better days. Her apron was slightly stained, but her smile lit up the room. There was something genuine about her, a kindness in her eyes that made you want to trust her instantly. "Here's your coffee," she said softly, placing the steaming mug before him. "Thanks," Jonathan replied, giving her a polite nod. But his gaze lingered longer than usual. Maybe it was the way she carried herself despite clearly having a rough day. Or maybe it was the exhaustion etched onto her face, hidden beneath layers of resilience. Whatever it was, it struck a chord within him. After finishing his drink, Jonathan reached for his wallet. He pulled out a few bills, leaving a generous tip, $150 to be exact. For someone who earned millions every month, this amount meant little, but for her, it might make all the difference. As he stood to leave, the waitress returned to clear his table. Seeing the cash, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, this is too much," she stammered, looking flustered. "It's fine," Jonathan assured her with a small smile. "Consider it a thank you for brightening my evening." Her cheeks flushed red and she clasped her hands together nervously. "I don't know what to say. Thank you so much." But just as she spoke, something else caught Jonathan's attention. Around her neck hung a delicate silver pendant. Its design was intricate, a crescent moon cradling a tiny star. Something about it tugged at his memory, stirring emotions he thought he'd locked away forever. He stared at it intently, unable to look away. Noticing his gaze, the waitress touched the pendant self-consciously. "Oh, this? It's been in my family for years. My grandmother gave it to me before she passed." Her words snapped him out of his trance. Nodding politely, he muttered a quick goodbye and walked out into the damp night. Yet even as he hailed a cab, his mind raced. That pendant, it looked identical to the one he had gifted Emily on her 16th birthday. He remembered picking it out himself, choosing the finest craftsmanship available. On the back, he'd engraved a heartfelt message: "Forever, my shining star." Could it really be the same one? Was it possible that after all these years, he'd stumbled upon a clue to his daughter's whereabouts? Doubt crept in alongside hope. After all, how likely was it that this random waitress had any connection to his lost child? Still, he couldn't shake off the feeling that destiny had intervened somehow. That night, lying awake in his luxurious penthouse, Jonathan replayed the encounter over and over in his mind. The pendant, the waitress's smile, the sincerity in her voice. It all felt strangely significant. Whether it was mere coincidence or something greater remained unclear. One thing was certain, though. He needed answers. And if finding them meant returning to that humble diner, then so be it. For now, The billionaire who had everything found himself clinging to the slimmest thread of possibility. In a world filled with numbers, profits, and power plays, this simple act of generosity had ignited a spark, a glimmer of hope that refused to fade. Little did he know, this chance meeting would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Jonathan woke up with the image of that pendant burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a coincidence. It wasn't just its design that haunted him. It was the emotions tied to it. That crescent moon and tiny star weren't just symbols. They were pieces of a memory he'd tried so hard to forget. They reminded him of Emily, of birthdays spent laughing together, of promises he thought would last forever. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring out at the city skyline from his penthouse window. The sun was rising over Chicago, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. But instead of admiring the view, his thoughts kept circling back to that waitress. Who was she? Where had she gotten the pendant? And why did it look exactly like the one he'd given to his daughter all those years ago? Jonathan knew he couldn't let this go. Something inside him, a mix of hope, curiosity, and desperation, was pulling him toward answers. So, after showering and grabbing a quick breakfast, he found himself driving back to the diner. It was early, barely past 8 a.m., but the place was already bustling with customers. Truck drivers sipped coffee at the counter while office workers huddled in booths, chatting about their day ahead. He walked in cautiously, scanning the room for her. Sure enough, there she was, the same waitress from the night before. She moved gracefully between tables, balancing plates and refilling cups, her smile still as warm as ever. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, unsure how to approach her without seeming strange or intrusive. Finally, he took a seat at an empty booth near the window and waited for her to notice him. When she eventually spotted him, recognition flickered across her face. "Morning," she said cheerfully, walking over with a notepad in hand. "Back again? What can I get you?" "Just coffee, thanks," Jonathan replied, trying to sound casual. As she turned to leave, he added, "And, if you don't mind me asking, could we talk for a minute? About your necklace?" She froze mid-step, glancing down at the pendant resting against her chest. For a brief second, she looked uneasy, almost defensive, but then she nodded slowly and slid into the booth across from him. "This?" she asked, touching the pendant lightly. "It's been in my family for as long as I can remember. My grandmother gave it to me when I was younger." "Why do you ask?" Jonathan leaned forward, his heart pounding. "It's familiar. I think I've seen something like it before." Her brow furrowed slightly and she tilted her head, studying him curiously. "Really? That's odd. It's not exactly common, but I've never heard anyone mention seeing one like it." He hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Telling her the truth felt risky. What if she thought he was crazy? Or worse, what if she got spooked and walked away? But he needed to know more. Taking a deep breath, he decided to tread carefully. "Used to own a similar pendant," he began, choosing his words carefully. "A long time ago, I gave it to someone very special to me. Someone who, well, let's just say they're no longer in my life. Seeing yours brought back some memories." Her expression softened and she nodded understandingly. "Oh, I see. That must have been tough, losing someone you cared about. If it makes you feel any better, this pendant has always meant a lot to me too. My grandmother said it carried good luck. Maybe that's why it feels meaningful to you too." Jonathan forced a small smile, though his mind was racing. Her explanation made sense, but it didn't quite fit. This pendant wasn't just similar, it was identical. Every detail matched. The curve of the moon, the placement of the star, even the way the chain looped through the clasp. He had picked it out himself, spending hours ensuring it was perfect. There was no way two such unique designs could exist independently, but pushing further right now might scare her off. Instead, he changed tactics, steering the conversation toward her life. "You mentioned your grandmother earlier. Did she tell you anything else about the pendant? Like where it came from or who owned it before her?" She shook her head, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not really. She wasn't big on sharing stories about the past. All I know is that it's been in our family for generations. Well, technically, her family. I grew up in foster care, so most of what I know comes from her. Foster care. The word hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. Emily had been placed in foster care after her mother passed away. Could it be possible? No, he told himself firmly. Don't jump to conclusions. Not yet. Still, the connection was undeniable. Determined to learn more, he offered a friendly smile. Well, thank you for humoring me. You've got a beautiful heirloom there. I hope it continues to bring you luck, she grinned, standing up to fetch his coffee. Thanks. And hey, maybe someday you'll find closure about whoever you gave yours to. Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. Her words lingered in his mind long after she left to tend to other customers. Closure. Was that what he was searching for? Or was it something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for in years? Later that evening, unable to focus on work, Jonathan sat at his desk scrolling through old photos on his laptop. He pulled up pictures of Emily as a child. Her bright smile, her curly hair, the way she used to run around the backyard chasing butterflies. Then he stopped on one particular photo, Emily wearing the pendant on her 16th birthday. Tears welled up in his eyes as he zoomed in on the necklace, comparing it to the mental image of the waitress's pendant. The resemblance was uncanny. That's when it hit him. He needed proof. Proof that the pendant was indeed the same one he'd given Emily. And if it was, he needed to understand how it ended up around the neck of a stranger. With renewed determination, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Hello? A gruff voice answered on the other end. It's me, Jonathan said quietly. I need your help. The man on the other line sighed heavily. What is it this time, another wild goose chase? No, Jonathan replied firmly. This time I think I'm onto something real. Over the next hour, he explained everything. The diner, the waitress, the pendant, and the eerie similarities between her story and Emily's. By the time he finished, the private investigator on the other end sounded intrigued. All right, the investigator said finally. Send me whatever details you have. I'll dig into her background and see what I can find. Hanging up the phone, Jonathan felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. After years of dead ends and unanswered questions, this felt different. Whether it led to Emily or not, he owed it to himself, and to her, to follow this lead wherever it went. As he stared out at the city lights once more, he whispered softly to himself, Please let this be real. The days that followed were a blur for Jonathan. He spent hours pacing the floors of his penthouse, replaying every detail of his encounter with the waitress. Her smile, her voice, the way she carried herself. It all felt oddly familiar, like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite put together. But it wasn't just her demeanor that tugged at his heartstrings. It was the pendant. That tiny silver crescent moon and star had become an obsession, haunting him day and night. Every time his phone buzzed, he jumped, hoping it was the investigator with news. But each call turned out to be something trivial. Business partners, asking about deals, assistants reminding him of meetings he didn't care about anymore. The weight of waiting was unbearable. For someone used to controlling every aspect of his life, this feeling of helplessness was foreign and maddening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the investigator called back. I've got something, he said, his tone cautious but intrigued. Jonathan's pulse quickened. What is it? Her name isn't important right now, the investigator began, but I found some interesting details about her background. She grew up in foster care after losing both parents in a car accident when she was 5. A grandmother took her in later, raised her until she passed away 10 years ago. Jonathan froze, gripping the edge of his desk. It was too much of a coincidence. Emily's mother had died in a car crash shortly before she disappeared. Could this waitress really be? No, he told himself. Don't get ahead of yourself. Not yet. There's more. The investigator continued. She doesn't know who her biological father is. Records list him as unknown. But there are whispers from social workers and old documents that suggest a wealthy businessman might have been involved in her mother's life briefly before vanishing. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. Wealthy businessman. Vanishing. Those words hit too close to home. His mind raced with questions. Had he unknowingly fathered another child? Was this why Emily had disappeared? Or was this waitress somehow connected to Emily directly? "I need you to keep digging," Jonathan said urgently. "Find out everything you can. And whatever you do, don't let anyone know we're looking into this." Hanging up the phone, Jonathan sank into his chair, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Guilt gnawed at him for not being there when Emily needed him most. Anger simmered beneath the surface, at himself, at the world, at whoever had kept her hidden all these years. But above all, hope flickered deep within him. What if this lead actually brought him closer to finding her? Later that week, Jonathan returned to the diner. This time he didn't just want answers, he wanted to connect. He knew he couldn't barge in demanding explanations without scaring her off. Instead, he decided to take things slow, building trust before revealing anything too personal. When she spotted him sitting in the same booth as before, she smiled warmly and approached. "You again?" she teased lightly. "Starting to think you're stalking me." Jonathan chuckled nervously, trying to play it cool. "Maybe I just love your coffee." She laughed, setting down a menu. "Well, you're in luck. We've got plenty of it. Same order as last time?" "For now," he replied. Then, hesitating slightly, he added, "Actually, I was wondering, would you mind grabbing a cup with me sometime? Somewhere quieter, maybe? I'd like to hear more about your story." Her expression shifted, curiosity mingling with caution. "My story?" "Yes," he said quickly. "You mentioned growing up in foster care and living with your grandmother. It sounds like you've overcome a lot. I admire that." She studied him for a moment as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. "Sure. Why not? Let's say tomorrow afternoon. There's a cafe a few blocks over. I'll meet you there." Relief washed over Jonathan. "Perfect. Thank you." The next day they met at the cafe, tucked away in a quiet corner where sunlight streamed through large windows. She arrived wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. Despite her casual appearance, there was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that reminded Jonathan so much of Emily. They ordered coffees and settled into a cozy table near the back. At first, their conversation stayed light, talk of work, hobbies, favorite foods. But gradually, Jonathan steered the discussion toward her past. "So, tell me more about your grandmother," he prompted gently. "What was she like?" A soft smile spread across her face. "She was amazing. Tough as nails, but full of love. She always told me I was special, even when I didn't feel like it. Said I came from strong roots, though she never went into specifics." "And your parents?" Jonathan asked carefully. "Do you remember them at all?" Her smile faded, replaced by a shadow of sadness. "Not really. I was so young when they died. All I have are photos and stories people told me later. Apparently my mom worked hard to provide for us, but things weren't easy. Dad? Well, no one ever talked much about him." Jonathan's chest tightened. "That must have been difficult." "It was," she admitted, "but Grandma made sure I knew I wasn't alone. She gave me that pendant when I turned 16, said it belonged to my mom and carried good luck." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Every detail seemed to align with Emily's story. The pendant, the loss of her mother, the mystery surrounding her father. Yet how could he possibly explain this without sounding insane? Taking a deep breath, he decided to test the waters. "You know, hearing your story reminds me of someone very dear to me. My daughter. She disappeared years ago. I've spent so long searching for her, hoping she's okay." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Wow, I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was," Jonathan confessed, his voice cracking slightly. "And honestly, part of the reason I've been asking about your past is because, well, there are similarities between your story and hers. Things that make me wonder." She frowned, leaning back in her chair. Wonder what? He hesitated, unsure how far to push. Just whether our paths might somehow be connected. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. She stared at him, clearly conflicted. Then softly she said, "Look, I appreciate your honesty, but this is all a bit overwhelming. I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not sure I'm ready to dive into something like this." Jonathan immediately backtracked, realizing he'd pushed too hard too soon. "Of course I understand. I didn't mean to upset you. Please forget I said anything." She sighed, her expression softening. "It's okay. I need time to process, you know?" He nodded earnestly. "Absolutely. Take all the time you need." As they finished their coffees, Jonathan couldn't shake the sense that he was on the verge of something monumental. Whether or not she believed him yet, the truth was inching closer, and with it, the possibility of finally reuniting with the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. Walking her out of the cafe, he promised himself one thing. He wouldn't give up until he uncovered the whole truth, no matter how long it took. The days following their meeting at the cafe were tense for Jonathan. He replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, analyzing every word, every reaction. She had been polite but guarded, clearly unsettled by his hints about her past. He knew he'd pushed too hard, too fast, but the urgency inside him was impossible to ignore. Every moment that passed felt like another step away from the truth he so desperately sought. Still, he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when he was this close. So, he waited, letting her have the space she needed while silently hoping she wouldn't shut him out completely. In the meantime, he threw himself into piecing together the fragments of her life with the help of the private investigator. The more they uncovered, the harder it became to deny the possibility. This waitress might actually be Emily. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, Jonathan received a call from the investigator. "We've got something big," the man said, his voice tinged with excitement. Jonathan's heart raced. "What is it?" "I dug deeper into her birth records," the investigator explained. "There's no doubt about it. Her mother matches the description of the woman you were involved with years ago. Same name, same timeline, and get this. I found an old hospital document listing you as the father." Jonathan felt the floor drop beneath him. His knees buckled and he sank into a nearby chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Are you sure?" he whispered hoarsely. "Positive," came the reply. "It all lines up. If she's not your biological daughter, then I don't know what else could explain it." For a long moment, Jonathan sat in stunned silence. The pieces were falling into place, but the weight of the revelation was almost unbearable. All these years he'd believed Emily was gone forever, lost to some unknown fate. But what if she hadn't disappeared at all? What if she'd simply been living under a different name, unaware of who she truly was? With newfound clarity and a sense of urgency, he decided it was time to confront her directly. Waiting any longer would only prolong the pain for both of them. But how could he approach such a delicate topic without scaring her off, or making her think he was delusional? Spent hours rehearsing what he would say, choosing each word carefully. Finally, the next morning, he returned to the diner where it all began. This time, he didn't sit in the booth. Instead, he approached her as soon as she spotted him. "Hey," she said, offering a tentative smile. "Back again?" "Yes," Jonathan replied, his tone serious yet gentle. "I need to talk to you privately." Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of concern. "Is everything okay?" "No," he admitted. "Not really, but I hope it will be once we clear a few things up." She hesitated, glancing around the busy diner before nodding. "All right, let me grab my break and we can step outside." Moments later, they stood under the awning of the diner, sheltered from the light drizzle that had begun to fall. Jonathan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to say. "First, let me apologize for how I handled things last time," he started. "I may have come across as intense, and that wasn't fair to you, but there's a reason why I've been asking so many questions about your past." She crossed her arms, her expression wary but curious. Okay, go on. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph, one of Emily as a child, wearing the very same pendant now hanging around the waitress's neck. "This is my daughter," he said softly, holding it out for her to see. "Her name is Emily. She disappeared years ago, shortly after her 16th birthday. That pendant, it belonged to her." Her eyes widened as she stared at the photo, taking in the familiar crescent moon and star. Slowly, she raised a hand to touch her own necklace, her fingers trembling slightly. "Wait, are you saying—" "I'm saying," Jonathan continued, his voice thick with emotion, "that I think you might be her." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. For several seconds, she just stood there, frozen, her mind struggling to process what he'd said. Then, shaking her head, she stepped back. "No, that can't be right. My grandmother told me I was adopted. She never mentioned anything like this." "I understand it's hard to believe," Jonathan said quickly, desperate to keep her from walking away. "But hear me out. Your mother, I knew her. We were together briefly before she passed away. Afterward, I lost contact with her family. I didn't know she had a child until much later. By then it was too late." She looked at him skeptically, her arms still crossed tightly over her chest. "Even if what you're saying is true, how do I know you're not lying? How do I know this isn't some kind of scam?" Jonathan nodded, understanding her skepticism. Reaching into his briefcase, he pulled out more evidence. Documents showing his connection to her mother, receipts from the jeweler who made the pendant, even old letters exchanged during their relationship. "These should prove I'm telling the truth," he said gently. "Please take your time looking through them." She flipped through the papers silently, her hands shaking as she absorbed the information. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the truth staring back at her. Everything matched. The timeline, the details, the pendant. It was all there. Undeniable. Finally, she looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Jonathan swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. "I wish I had answers for you. All I know is that I've spent years searching for you, hoping you were safe. Finding you here feels like a miracle." Tears streamed down her face now, mingling with the raindrops. She didn't say anything for a long moment, processing everything she'd just learned. Then quietly she asked, "If I'm really Emily, why did you leave us? Why weren't you there?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Lowering his gaze, he struggled to find the right words. "I made mistakes," he admitted painfully. "I thought I was protecting you both by staying away, but in doing so I abandoned you. I'll regret that decision for the rest of my life. But please believe me when I say I never stopped loving you, never stopped looking for you." Her shoulders sagged, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions crashing over her. Part of her wanted to lash out, to scream at him for leaving her behind. But another part, a deeper, quieter part, felt a flicker of relief. For years, she'd carried the weight of feeling unwanted, unloved. Now, standing here with him, she realized she wasn't alone. She never had been. "I don't know what to say," she murmured finally. "This is a lot to take in." "I know," Jonathan replied, his voice breaking. "And I won't pressure you to decide anything right now. Just know that I'm here for whatever you need, whenever you're ready." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Thank you for telling me the truth." As they stood there under the awning, the rain falling softly around them, a fragile bond began to form. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't healed overnight, but it was a start. Together, they took the first steps toward rebuilding what had been broken, laying the foundation for a future neither of them had dared to hope for. The confrontation had opened the door to healing, but the journey ahead would be long and challenging. Yet for the first time in years, Jonathan felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to make amends and reconnect with the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. In the days that followed their emotional confrontation outside the diner, both Jonathan and the waitress, now known to him as Emily, struggled to process everything. For Jonathan, it was a whirlwind of guilt, relief, and hope. He had spent years blaming himself for losing her, haunted by the thought that she might be gone forever. Now, standing on the brink of reconnecting with his daughter, he felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. But he also knew this wasn't about him. It was about her. She needed time to heal, to understand, and most importantly, to decide whether she wanted him in her life again. For Emily, the revelation had turned her world upside down. Growing up, she'd always felt like something was missing, a gap she couldn't quite explain. Her grandmother had filled much of that void with love and stories, but there were still unanswered questions. Who was her father? Why hadn't he been part of her life? And now here he was, a man claiming to have searched for her all these years, carrying the same pendant she wore every day. It was too much to take in. Part of her wanted to believe him, to embrace this second chance at having a family. But another part, the part shaped by years of abandonment and uncertainty, was hesitant, even fearful. Despite the complexity of their situation, they agreed to meet regularly to talk. At first, these meetings were awkward, filled with long pauses and nervous glances. They started small, sharing surface-level details about their lives, what music they liked, where they'd traveled, simple things that helped them find common ground. Over time, though, the conversations grew deeper. Jonathan shared memories of Emily's childhood, the way she used to giggle uncontrollably during tickle fights, how she loved climbing trees despite constantly scraping her knees. He showed her old photo albums, pointing out moments frozen in time, birthdays, holidays, lazy summer afternoons. Emily listened intently, her heart aching with each story. These were pieces of her past she didn't remember, or rather pieces she'd buried deep inside because remembering hurt too much. As she flipped through the photos, she began to recognize fragments of herself in the little girl staring back at her. The curly hair, the mischievous grin, the sparkle in her eyes. It was all so familiar. Yet, it felt like looking at a stranger. One evening, as they sat together in Jonathan's penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights, Emily finally broke the silence. "Why did you give me away?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Was it because you didn't want me?" Jonathan's chest tightened, and he reached across the table to hold her hand. "No," he said firmly, his voice thick with emotion. "It was never about not wanting you. I thought I was doing the right thing for your safety, for your future. Your mother and I, we weren't ready to be parents. When she passed, I panicked. I convinced myself I'd ruin your life if I tried to raise you alone. So I let others take care of you, thinking it was best." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she processed his words. "You left me behind," she whispered. "Do you know what that felt like? To grow up wondering why no one wanted you?" Jonathan nodded, tears streaming down his own face. "I can only imagine how painful that must have been, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." She looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing the regret etched into his features. In that moment she realized he wasn't perfect. He was human, just like her. He'd made mistakes, yes, but he was trying. That mattered more than anything. As weeks turned into months, their bond slowly strengthened. Jonathan introduced Emily to parts of his world, the luxurious lifestyle, the sprawling estates, the high-profile events. But more importantly, he embraced hers. He visited the diner where they'd first met, chatting with her co-workers and learning about her daily routines. He joined her on walks along Lake Michigan, listening as she talked about her dreams and fears. He even helped her move into a new apartment closer to his place, insisting she deserved better than the cramped studio she'd been living in. Through it all, Emily found herself opening up in ways she never thought possible. For years she'd built walls around her heart, afraid of being hurt again. But Jonathan's persistence and his vulnerability chipped away at those defenses. Slowly, she began to trust him, not just as a father figure, but as a person who genuinely cared about her happiness. Their healing journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of tension, times when old wounds resurfaced and tempers flared. Once, during a heated argument, Emily accused Jonathan of using money to fix everything. "You think buying me things will make up for lost time?" she snapped, frustration bubbling over. "It doesn't work like that." Jonathan listened quietly, letting her vent. When she finished, he simply nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "Money can't erase the past or replace the years we missed. All I can do is try to be here now, for real, not just with gifts or gestures. If that means earning your trust one step at a time, then that's what I'll do." His honesty disarmed her, softening her anger. From that point on, they worked harder to communicate openly, addressing issues head-on instead of letting resentment fester. One of the turning points in their relationship came when Jonathan suggested they visit places from Emily's childhood. He took her to the park where she used to play, the library where she'd spent hours reading fairy tales, and the ice cream shop she'd begged him to take her to on hot summer days. Each location brought back memories, not just for him, but for her too. Though faint, glimpses of her early years began to surface, filling in gaps she hadn't realized existed. On one such trip, they stopped at the house where she'd grown up before entering foster care. It was dilapidated now, its once vibrant paint peeling and its windows boarded up. Standing in front of it, Emily felt a surge of conflicting emotions: sadness for the home she barely remembered, gratitude for the grandmother who'd raised her, and a newfound appreciation for the man standing beside her. "I wish I could go back," she admitted quietly, not to change anything, but just to remember more clearly. Jonathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We can't go back," he said gently, "but we can move forward, together. Whatever you need. I'm here." By the end of their 6th month reconnecting, Emily had moved past the initial shock and skepticism. She still had moments of doubt, flashes of insecurity about whether she truly belonged in Jonathan's life. But overall, she felt lighter, freer. For the first time, she understood that being abandoned as a child didn't define her worth, or her ability to love and be loved. And Jonathan? He finally felt like he was becoming the father he'd always wanted to be. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, he cherished every moment he got to spend with Emily. Together, they were rebuilding what had been broken, creating something stronger and more resilient than either of them could have imagined. Little did they know, their journey was far from over. Something else awaited them, an opportunity to turn their personal pain into purpose, to help others facing similar struggles. But for now, they focused on healing, cherishing the gift of a second chance neither of them had dared to dream of. As the months passed, Jonathan and Emily continued to grow closer. Their bond wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real, raw, and rooted in honesty. They had both come a long way since that rainy evening outside the diner. For Jonathan, every shared laugh, every quiet moment together felt like redemption. For Emily, each memory uncovered and every heartfelt conversation helped her piece together the fragments of her identity. Together, they were learning to navigate this new chapter of their lives. One afternoon, as they sat side by side on a park bench overlooking Lake Michigan, Emily turned to Jonathan with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she began, her voice soft but steady, "all these years I thought I was alone, that no one cared about me, but now I realize there's so much more to my story than I ever imagined." Jonathan smiled warmly, placing a hand on hers. "And your story isn't over yet. Neither is ours." Her gaze drifted toward the water shimmering under the sunlight. After a pause, she added, "I've been thinking, what if we could help others who feel the same way I did? People who've lost their families, or don't even know where to start looking for them." The idea struck a chord with Jonathan immediately. He had spent years consumed by guilt and regret, pouring his energy into building an empire while neglecting the things that truly mattered. Now, here was a chance to channel those emotions into something meaningful, to give back to people facing the kind of pain he and Emily had endured. That night, unable to sleep, Jonathan found himself pacing the floors of his penthouse. Emily's suggestion lingered in his mind, sparking a fire within him. What if they could create something bigger than themselves? Something that brought hope to families torn apart by tragedy. The thought filled him with purpose, a sense of direction he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, he called Emily to share his thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," he told her over the phone, "about helping others. I think it's a brilliant idea. In fact, I want us to build something together, something that honors your journey and gives others a chance at closure." She sounded surprised but intrigued. "What do you mean?" "A non-profit organization," he explained. "We'll dedicate it to reuniting families separated by circumstances beyond their control. We can offer resources, counseling, and support to people searching for loved ones or trying to rebuild relationships after being apart for years." Emily hesitated for a moment, then replied, "It sounds amazing. But are you sure you're ready to step away from your company? Isn't that your life's work?" Jonathan chuckled softly. "It was my life's work. But lately I've realized there's more to life than boardrooms and balance sheets. This, helping others heal, is what I want to focus on now. Besides, I can't think of a better partner for this project than you." Her voice softened, touched by his words. "All right, let's do it." Over the following weeks, they threw themselves into planning the nonprofit. They named it Shining Star Foundation, inspired by the pendant that had brought them back together. The name symbolized hope, resilience, and the belief that even in darkness, people could find their way to light. With Jonathan's resources and connections, and Emily's first-hand experience of loss and rediscovery, they assembled a team of experts, social workers, counselors, investigators, and volunteers, all dedicated to making a difference. Their first initiative was a nationwide campaign to raise awareness about missing persons and estranged families. Through social media, public events, and partnerships with local organizations, they spread the word about the Foundation's mission. Stories began pouring in from across the country. Stories of parents searching for children, siblings separated by foster care systems, grandparents longing to reconnect with grandchildren. Each case tugged at their hearts, reminding them why they had started this journey in the first place. One particularly moving story came from a woman named Lisa, who had been searching for her brother for over 2 decades. Her voice cracked with emotion during a video call with Emily. "I didn't think anyone cared anymore," Lisa admitted, "but hearing about your story gave me hope. If you could find your dad after all these years, maybe I can find my brother too." Moments like these fueled their determination. They worked tirelessly, ensuring that every person who reached out received the attention and support they deserved. Sometimes, the process was slow and frustrating. Not every case ended happily. Not every family found closure. But even in those difficult moments, Jonathan and Emily reminded themselves of the bigger picture. They were planting seeds of hope, one story at a time. As the foundation gained momentum, Jonathan made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He stepped down as CEO of his real estate empire. To many, it seemed like madness. Why walk away from billions when he could easily balance both roles? But Jonathan knew better. His heart was no longer in the corporate world. It belonged to the foundation, to the people whose lives they were changing, and most importantly, to Emily. At the press conference announcing his resignation, reporters bombarded him with questions. "Why leave now?" one asked. "After everything you've built?" Jonathan smiled, glancing at Emily seated beside him. "Because I've discovered something far more valuable than money," he answered simply. "Family, purpose, love. Those are the things worth fighting for." The room erupted in applause, but Emily's reaction meant the most to him. She leaned over and whispered, "I'm proud of you." With Jonathan fully committed to the foundation, they expanded its reach globally. They organized support groups, hosted reunification events, and provided financial assistance to families struggling to afford search efforts. One of their proudest achievements was launching a database connecting DNA samples from missing persons with potential matches, a tool that reunited dozens of families within its first year. Through it all, Emily remained at the center of the Foundation's mission. She traveled across the country sharing her story, inspiring others to hold on to hope. Her courage and vulnerability resonated deeply with audiences, earning her recognition as a powerful advocate for family reunification. Back home, the silver pendant took on new significance. Jonathan suggested displaying it in the Foundation's headquarters, encased in glass alongside a plaque inscribed with the words, "Forever, my shining star." It became a symbol of resilience, of journeys, completed and still unfolding. Visitors often paused before it, reflecting on their own stories of loss and hope. For Emily, seeing the pendant displayed publicly marked another step in her healing process. It reminded her of how far she'd come, and how much farther she could go with Jonathan by her side. Though scars remained, she chose to focus on the future rather than dwell on the past. Together, they proved that love could transcend even the darkest chapters of life. In the end, what started as a random act of generosity at a small diner blossomed into something extraordinary. A billionaire's gift of $150 led to the discovery of a daughter he thought he'd lost forever. And from their reunion emerged a legacy of compassion, unity, and second chances. Every day, Jonathan thanked fate, or perhaps just the universe, for bringing them back together. As he stood beside Emily at a charity gala one evening, watching the crowd celebrate their achievements, he leaned over and whispered, "This is only the beginning." She smiled, squeezing his hand tightly. "Yeah," she agreed. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Underneath the glittering chandeliers, surrounded by people whose lives they had touched, father and daughter shared a quiet moment of gratitude. Against all odds, they had found each other again, and in doing so had created a brighter future for countless others. It seemed like Jonathan and Emily's journey had reached a natural conclusion. They had reconnected, built a foundation to help others, and created a bond stronger than either of them could have imagined. But life, as it often does, had one more twist in store for them, a twist that would test their newfound relationship and push them to grow even closer. One crisp autumn morning, Jonathan received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer, someone he hadn't heard from in years. "Mr. Reed," the man began, his tone serious yet measured, "I'm calling about a matter concerning your late partner, the mother of your daughter." Jonathan froze, gripping the phone tightly. It had been decades since he'd thought about her, the woman who had brought Emily into his life. He had loved her deeply, but their relationship had ended abruptly after her tragic death. "What is this about?" he asked cautiously. "There's a property," the lawyer explained, "a cabin she purchased shortly before passing away. It was left untouched all these years because no one knew what to do with it. Recently, however, we discovered documentation naming you and your daughter as co-beneficiaries." "A cabin?" Jonathan racked his brain, trying to recall any mention of such a place. Nothing came to mind. "Where is it located?" he asked. "Up north," the lawyer replied, "near Traverse City. If you're interested, I can arrange access for you and your daughter to visit." After hanging up, Jonathan sat quietly, staring out at the golden leaves fluttering in the wind. A cabin? Could it hold answers to questions he didn't even know he had? More importantly, how would Emily react to this news? Later that day, he broached the subject with her over dinner. "Something came up today," he said carefully, watching her expression. "The lawyer handling your mother's estate found a property, a cabin up north. Apparently it belongs to us now." Emily's fork paused midair, her brow furrowing slightly. "A cabin? Why didn't anyone tell me about it before?" "I don't think anyone knew. Jonathan admitted. Not even me. Your mom must have bought it without telling anyone. Do you want to go see it? Maybe there's, I don't know, something inside that might help us understand her better. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She had spent so much time processing her past, piecing together fragments of her identity. Did she really want to dig deeper? But then curiosity got the better of her. All right, she said finally. Let's go. The drive to Traverse City was long but scenic, the roads lined with fiery red and orange trees. Neither of them spoke much during the trip, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the cabin nestled deep within a forest overlooking a serene lake, they were both struck by its simplicity. It wasn't grand or luxurious. It was cozy, with weathered, wooden walls and a stone chimney. Clearly it had been untouched for years. As they stepped inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The air smelled faintly of pine and aged wood. Slowly they began exploring the rooms, finding remnants of the past, tucked away in drawers and closets. Old books, photographs, handwritten letters. It was as if time itself had stood still here. In one corner of the living room, Emily stumbled upon a small wooden box. Opening it, she gasped softly. Inside were mementos, ticket stubs from concerts, dried flowers pressed between pages of notebooks, and a letter addressed to her. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. Dear Emily, the note read, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to watch you grow. Please know that I loved you more than words can express. This cabin was meant to be our special place, a retreat where we could escape the chaos of the world. I hope someday you'll find joy here just as I did. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she finished reading. She turned to Jonathan, clutching the letter tightly. She wanted this to be ours, she whispered. Hers and mine. Jonathan nodded, his own eyes glistening. She always thought ahead, he murmured. Even when things were falling apart, she tried to leave something beautiful behind. Over the next few days, they cleaned the cabin together, bringing it back to life. Each task felt meaningful, scrubbing floors, polishing furniture, hanging fresh curtains. As they worked side by side, sharing stories and laughter, they grew even closer. The cabin became more than just a physical space. It symbolized healing, connection, and the enduring love of a mother who had tried her best despite overwhelming odds. On their final evening there, they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the sun dipped below the horizon. The lake shimmered in the fading, light-reflecting hues of pink and purple. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply soak in the peacefulness of the moment. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Do you think Mom knew? She asked softly. That we'd find this place someday? Jonathan smiled, his gaze fixed on the water. Maybe not exactly like this, but she believed in second chances, in making the most of whatever life threw at us. That's why she left this for you, so you'd always have somewhere to come home to. Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. Thank you, she said quietly, for coming here with me. For everything. He kissed the top of her head, his heart swelling with gratitude. No, thank you. You've given me a chance to be the father I should have been all along. When they returned to Chicago, they decided to keep the cabin as a family retreat, a place where they could escape the noise of the city and reconnect with nature, memories, and each other. It also became a sanctuary for families helped by the Shining Star Foundation, offering them a quiet space to heal and rebuild. Through the cabin, Jonathan and Emily realized that their journey was never truly about finding closure. It was about creating new beginnings. Together they proved that love, resilience, and forgiveness could transform even the hardest moments into something beautiful. And as they stood once again beneath the awning of the diner where it all began, reminiscing about how far they'd come, they knew one thing for certain. Their story was proof that fate had a way of bringing people back together when they least expected it.